Welcome to the BamaNewsNow.com podcast. I am your host and the founder and editor of the site, BamaNewsNow.com. My name is David Preston, and I'm pleased to be joined by the man that has been dubbed by political commentators on both sides of the aisle as the best retail politician in the state of Alabama, Alabama Secretary of State, John Merrill. Welcome to the show, Secretary.
David, thanks for having me as your guest today.
So, any comment on being dubbed the best retail politician in the state?
Well, it's an honor, and it's also an assignment that I do not take lightly. You know, one of the things that puts an individual in a position like that to be recognized as such is a determination of continued investment into getting out and seeing as many people as you can possibly see and interacting with them where they are on a personal level. And I always want to be noted for that, my friend.
That's good. And for those of you that are listening to the podcast, y'all obviously can't see this, but he's fixing to go through the statistics of registered voters because I'm fixing to ask him to do it, but he can do this off the top of his head without any notes at all. So, Mr. Secretary, take it away. How many registered voters have there been in the state of Alabama, and kind of break it down by the numbers since you've been in office?
Well, David, look, you know, we've taken a lot of pride in ensuring that each and every eligible U.S. citizen that's a resident of Alabama is given the opportunity to become a registered voter and to obtain a photo ID. And since January the 19th, 2015, which is 5 years, 5 months, and 11 days ago, we have registered 1,543,427 new voters. We now have a state record 3,605,903 registered voters in the state of Alabama. Those numbers are unprecedented and unparalleled in the history of the state of Alabama. And per capita, we've done more than any state in the union in the same period of time. So we're very, very proud of that.
And I didn't even prompt him that we were going to do that today. So kudos to you. That's something I know that you're very proud of, and your office should be very proud of doing that. So let's kind of get into why we wanted to have you on the show today, and that was to talk about the upcoming July 14th runoff. That's not something that normally happens in Alabama with the early primary season that we have. If we have a runoff, it's usually 30 days, 3 weeks after the primary. Obviously, that got pushed back because of the coronavirus. Kind of tell people the process of what happened there, why we're going to be voting in the middle of the hot Alabama summer instead of the hot Alabama spring.
Thanks, Dave. You know, there's a couple of things we need to talk about. First of all, we need to remind all of your listeners that in 2019, we passed legislation to change the runoff from a 6-week period to a 4-week period. Because the reason it was initially changed to 6 weeks about 2 decades ago was to make sure that our military servicemen and women would be able to vote and do so in an unobtrusive manner. Now, we've even improved that process to the point where we can allow our military servicemen and women to vote electronically. So they're able to vote with electronic ballot return and electronic ballot delivery. And we were the first state in the union to be able to do that. So we're very, very excited to have led the nation in that regard. Now, David, in 2018, when I was running for re-election, one of the things that we discovered, and it was just through a conversation, was that there is no way for an individual or an entity in our state to change the election day if it's necessary. If we had a tornado, we had fires, if we had flooding, hurricanes, anything like that. So we gave attention to that after we were reelected. And then in 2019, we took that legislation to the House and the Senate. I met with leaders of each chamber, and frankly, David, was told by a couple of members, look, this is not something we need to be concerned about. Alabama's 200 years old. We've never had a need to do this. We don't have a need to do it now. So we were kind of rebuffed in our efforts. Well, fast forward another 8 to 10 months, we're with the coronavirus. And so we're in a situation where we definitely needed that. So when this thing started to hit hot and heavy, one of the things that we realized was that we had to take some steps that we already knew were going to be required. I wrote a letter to Attorney General Steve Marshall asking General Marshall, look, do you believe like we do that according to Title 31-9 1, that when the governor has declared a state of emergency, that she has the power to change an election day, that she can suspend or postpone or delay that election if necessary. He agreed with us. So we took our plan to Governor Ivey, we laid it in front of her, and we said, Governor, look, this is what we think we need to do. Now, all of this had taken place prior to the time of the primary, with the exception of asking for the Attorney General's opinion. So on the 17th of March, General Marshall, Governor Ivey, and I held a press conference here in the Capitol where we talked about what we were going to do. Now, the governor adopted everything that we presented to her, but the one thing she was very concerned about was making sure that we had the election day for the runoff scheduled for July the 14th. And the reason that that date was selected is because it's the last possible date that we could have the election and it not interfere with the standard November 3rd general election, because you've got certification deadlines, you've got administrative deadlines that all have to be adhered to. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to meet all of those standards. So at that point, we started changing the way we were going to administer the election. Now, one of the things that people that have been really watching elections for a long time would have found interesting is that since March the 17th, our voters have been able to vote an absentee ballot. So for more than 110 days, we have made the opportunity for an absentee ballot to be available for any voter that would like to cast one. Now, typically, the absentee process starts 55 days before the election. Ballots will be mailed out no earlier than 42 days before the election. And so then people can cast their ballot for the candidate of their choice from their home or from their business if they've chosen to. But one of the things that some people have been concerned about is, hey, tell me this, since Alabama is an absentee excuse state, what box are we supposed to check? If we're just afraid to go to the polls and we don't want to vote in person, we're not sure what box we should check. So Title 17-11-3 gives me, the Secretary of State, as the chief election official, the ability to designate a reason for people to vote absentee if required when we're in a state of emergency. So the box that we've encouraged people to check is the one that says I'm ill or infirm and will be unable to appear at my polling site on election day. And if they mark that box, stated anybody in the state that chooses to go that direction will be qualified as an absentee voter. And we've made it a lot easier for people to be able to understand what they need to do in order to participate in the elections process through absentee. Now, two other things. Number one, we've been running advertisements since the middle of April all across the state, encouraging people to vote absentee if they want to. So their voice will be heard and their vote will be counted. But we have also made sure that people knew that if they want to get their absentee ballot, it's going to be a simple process. They can download it from their home or from their place of business, and then they just follow the law and the guidelines that have been established in order for their vote to be counted for the candidate of their choice.
And recently, a couple of federal courts along those lines, we'll just move right into that, has said that they wanted some other accommodations made on election day, especially for people that are either afraid to go to the polling place because of coronavirus or whatever reason. Kind of explain what happened there, why the courts got involved, and what they said you as the state's chief election officer have to accommodate people for.
Well, Dave, it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that people are obviously not aware of is that the changes that we've been able to make, we've made according to the law in Title 17-11-7. I don't have the prerogative to change the signature requirement or to change the requirement related to the excuse provisions that are already in the code related to absentee voting. But there were some people that filed a lawsuit against me in my official capacity as the secretary, and against Mobile County, Jefferson County, and Lee County, asking that the signature provisions be removed for witness requirements, and also that the requirement be removed for an excuse provision. And a federal judge who was appointed by President Obama in August of 2009 ruled that they could remove those provisions. And at that point, when we got that, we appealed that and asked for a stay first and foremost, so we could see if the judges on the 11th Circuit would agree with us that that needed to be held in abeyance and that we could continue with the direct administration of the elections. That appeal was, the stay of the appeal was denied, but the full appeal is still under process. And yesterday afternoon, we appealed for a stay to the U.S. Supreme Court. So now it's going before the 9 justices of the Supreme Court of the United States to ask for their interpretation of the law. Because, David, we believe that the law needs to be followed. We do not believe that people need to legislate from the bench. And we do believe that if you want to change the law, there's a way to do that, and it's called the legislative process.
Now, how does that process work with the Supreme Court? Is it the justice that oversees the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals finds that the request for a stay has merit and then issues it himself, or does he take it to the other 9 justices, and they vote on it? Because I know that whenever they vote to hear an appeal, they kind of meet in a Friday afternoon conference and they vote yay or nay. Is that the same process, or is it different?
Yes, but there's a little different situation here because we're dealing with a time constraint. Actually, in 15 days, we're going to have the election. And so we want an expedited request to be issued. So General Marshall's team, led by Jim Davis, who is one of his top lawyers there, is taking this for us to the Supreme Court. And so we continue to follow their lead and their guidance.
Are there any other changes that the federal courts at this point say that you have to make on election day? I know there's been some discussion in other media outlets about curbside voting versus non-curbside voting, polling places, that kind of stuff. Is your team working on, in case that stay doesn't happen, having a plan in place to implement on election day to meet those requirements that the federal court says you?
Things, it's also in the appeal, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because curbside voting is not something that has been approved by law in the state of Alabama. And our position is that if it's not strictly written in the code or the Constitution that this is supposed to be permitted, then it's prohibited. And yet a liberal interpretation would be, well, if it's not expressly written that it's prohibited, then it should be granted and it should be offered. Now, I don't understand that logic or that reasoning, but we have a strict constructionalist, constitutionalist position on this issue. And that's the reason we're where we are today on that particular issue. But we expect all probate judges in all 67 counties to follow state law and to do what is required according to state law for the administration of the elections process. And that's what we're encouraging them to do. That's what we're instructing them to do.
Which is a great segue into my next topic I want to talk about, which is the preparations your office is undertaking. I mean, I'm sure you're in kind of, if this was a football game, it would be the fourth quarter for your office. What kind of explain to the listeners what your office is doing to prepare for the election on in 15 days from now on July 14th to be ready to handle, kind of like the Super Bowl of voting, which is election day. I mean, I know the big Super Bowl is going to be in November, but.
Well, Dave, that's a great question, and I will tell you that according to absentee participation, we've had more than 30,000 applications that have been submitted for the absentee ballot process, and we only had 18,000 people vote absentee in the March 3rd primary. So we don't know how many people will actually vote, but we do know how many applications have been submitted so far. And that is a large improvement over what we saw in March. Now, the other thing that your listeners need to know is that all 1,980 polling sites in the state of Alabama will be open on election day in all 67 counties. So they should vote in person if they want to at their regular polling site. That's the location where they will actually go and vote. Now, the thing that will be different about what they'll be seeing that day as opposed to what they normally see when they go to vote in person, is that all polling officials will be wearing masks. All polling officials will be wearing non-latex gloves. There will be an enormous number of sanitized wipes available, or disinfectant spray to be used, and hand sanitizer to take advantage of for those individuals as well as for our voters that will attend there. But when the elections are over, one of the things that will be different is that all polling sites in the state will be sanitized and returned to their pre-election condition. And those resources that are making all of those things available, David, are provided to the counties by the federal government. The local government does not have to cover that. Municipalities, the county, regional operations, the state government, the federal government is paying for all of that through the CARES Act resources that were approved about 3.5 months ago. It should also be noted that that total amount for our state is $7.8 million with our match that we had to put in. And it should be noted that what we asked each one of the 67 counties to do, we sent an application to the probate judge, to the sheriff, to the circuit clerk, to the county commission, and to the board of registrars, asking them to examine what they thought their needs were in their county and to submit their plan to us by June the 12th. We finished the last one yesterday, and we are sending checks out today to all of those counties, making sure that we're able to meet their needs as they introduce them to us.
Now, is there anything in state law that prohibits people from wearing a face mask and gloves into the polling places themselves, or are you going to leave that up to the specific ordinances of the local municipalities and counties?
David, it's interesting you should ask that question. We encourage voters to do what they feel comfortable doing. If they would like to vote in person and wear a mask and wear gloves when they go in, that's what they should do. We actually had one county that submitted a request to buy enough face masks for every polling site in their county so that as voters arrive, voters would be able to be assigned a face mask if they didn't come in with one, so they could wear that during their voting experience.
So on July 14th, what you're saying is show up to your normal polling place that you showed up to on March 3rd, unless you voted Democrat and you don't have a Democratic runoff, then don't show up to the polls, because obviously that's important to remind people if there is a prohibition against crossover voting in the state. But if you want to show up in a face mask and gloves, and you won't be turned away because you're wearing a face mask.
Absolutely not. And let me also add, David, that one of the things that your listeners need to be reminded of is that we want to make this a comfortable opportunity for them. And so if they're not sure where they're supposed to be voting, they can download our mobile app at Vote for Alabama, or they can go to our website at alabamavotes.gov, and they can put their information in there using their driver's license, and it will tell them exactly where they're supposed to be voting. And it will tell them what races are on their ballot, so they will know before they go to the polls. And they can see a sample ballot that they can look at to see what it will appear to be when they go to vote on July 14th. Let me also add, this is a great time to do this, that when they are given their ballot, that ballot will say March 31st, 2020. They do not need to think that their ballot is not going to count. But we had to make a choice, and the choice was, what are we going to do with these thousands of ballots that we've already purchased, already assigned to use on election day? Are we going to discard those and reprint them just so we can put July 14th on there? I said, absolutely not. We're going to use those ballots to make sure that we are being good stewards of the taxpayer resources.
And I'm sure that you'll have some sort of guidance for local voting officials and polling workers, that if they get that question, they'll be able to answer it efficiently and effectively by saying, yes, your vote will still count even though the date is wrong on the ballot.
That's correct.
So, all right. Well, there'll actually be two races on my ballot because I'm in Mobile County, so I'll be in the Senate runoff and the AL congressional runoff. And speaking of the AL1 congressional district runoff, Jerry Carl's campaign is predicting a 5 to 8% voter turnout for the runoff on July 14th. Do you concur, as the state's top election official, that that's going to be the number, or do you have a different prediction?
No, that's going to be a little bit low, especially in Congressional District 1 and Congressional District 2, because we do have Congressional District runoffs there. And I think it's important to know that people are going to turn out for their election because they want to have their voice heard and their vote counted. We anticipate that we're going to have somewhere between a 7 to 22% statewide turnout, David. You know, some people have said, look, we are concerned that this will be an all-time record low in voter participation. And I've reminded them that that's not the case. In July of 2012, we had a 4% turnout. In July of 2014, we had an 11% turnout. In 2016, we had a 12% turnout. So we're going to be north of there, primarily because of the race between Senator Hightower and Commissioner Carl, also between Representative Moore and businessman Jeff Coleman in the Wiregrass for the CD2 race, and with the U.S. Senate runoff between Senator Sessions and Coach Tuberville.
Now, is that you cut out a little bit and had a little bit of freeze there? You were saying 17 to 22% turnout for the runoff, correct? Now, is that going to be kind of in the same range statewide, or is it going to be higher in the congressional districts 1 and 2 and lower in the other areas? How do you think that's going to?
I think it'll be a little higher there in the Wiregrass and in lower Alabama, down in Mobile and Baldwin County, simply because there's more interest in the races. And people want to make sure that their candidates get elected. So that's why I'm anticipating we're going to have a higher turnout down in those locations than we will in other parts of the state where there are no runoffs.
So the other parts of the state where there's no runoffs, we could possibly see lower than the 17%, and the parts of the state where there's a congressional runoff, we could see a higher turnout, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it also needs to be remembered that we have certain counties that have Board of Education, superintendent, county commissioners, county school board races that are going to be on the ballot that are going to have to be settled in the runoff as well. And so those will generate more traffic in certain areas than others too.
Anything else you'd like to let the voters of Alabama know going into the fourth quarter here in this primary runoff election before we let you go?
I don't think so, David. I think that just about covers it. But if you think of anything else that I can share with your listeners, please don't hesitate to reach back to me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you.